Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a breaking story that's making waves across the Middle East and beyond. The Israeli Navy has diverted seized vessels from the Sumud Flotilla to the port of Ashdod. This incident has sparked a storm of reactions internationally, drawing attention once again to the volatile situation between Israel and Gaza, and raising new questions about humanitarian aid, maritime law, and regional tensions. Let's break down exactly what happened, why it matters, and what could come next. The Sumud Flotilla was organized as part of a broader international effort to deliver humanitarian aid to Gaza by sea. Activists, volunteers, and human rights advocates from several countries joined this mission, claiming their goal was to provide essential supplies like food, medicine, and water purification systems to Gaza's struggling population. But as history has shown, attempts to reach Gaza by sea are rarely straightforward. Israel maintains a naval blockade around the territory, citing security concerns and the need to prevent weapons smuggling to Hamas and other militant groups. Any vessel attempting to breach that blockade faces interception, inspection, or diversion. In this latest incident, the Israeli Navy reportedly intercepted several vessels from the flotilla as they approached Gazan waters. According to the Israeli Defense Forces, the ships were given multiple warnings to change course and dock at an approved port for inspection. When those warnings were ignored, naval units moved in to take control. The vessels were then escorted to the port of Ashdod, a move Israel says is in line with international law and necessary to ensure that the cargo does not include prohibited materials or weapons that could endanger Israeli civilians. The activists on board, however, have described the event very differently. According to their accounts, the flotilla was on a peaceful humanitarian mission, carrying no military equipment, and the interception was a violation of their right to provide aid to civilians in need. Several organizers have accused Israel of using the blockade as a political tool to isolate Gaza and suppress international efforts to alleviate its humanitarian crisis. Videos from on board some of the ships, which have been shared widely on social media, show tense moments as Israeli commandos boarded the vessels, raising concerns about the treatment of activists and the legality of Israel's actions in international waters. The port of Ashdod has become a familiar destination in such incidents. Located about 40 kilometers north of Gaza, it serves as Israel's main checkpoint for intercepted maritime traffic bound for the enclave. Once the seized vessels arrive, Israeli authorities inspect all cargo, separating what they deem humanitarian supplies from restricted items. Israel has stated that any approved goods will eventually be transported to Gaza through land crossings, though critics say this process is slow, selective, and often results in much of the cargo being withheld or delayed indefinitely. This latest confrontation has reignited debate over the legality and morality of Israel's naval blockade. Israel argues that the blockade is a legitimate act of self-defense under international law, authorized to prevent arms smuggling and rocket attacks. It points to past instances where weapons and explosives have been discovered hidden in aid shipments, underscoring its claim that strict control is essential. The Israeli government also argues that humanitarian aid can reach Gaza through proper, coordinated channels, and that independent flotillas are unnecessary provocations designed to create political spectacles rather than genuinely help civilians. However, critics, including many international organizations and human rights groups, view the blockade as a form of collective punishment that violates international humanitarian law. They argue that it severely restricts the movement of goods and people, contributing to Gaza's economic collapse and humanitarian suffering. According to UN reports, the blockade has contributed to chronic shortages of food, medicine, clean water, and fuel in Gaza, while unemployment and poverty rates continue to soar. The flotilla's name, Sumud, is itself symbolic. In Arabic, Sumud means steadfastness or resilience, a term deeply associated with Palestinian resistance and endurance under occupation. The activists behind the flotilla have said that their mission was not just about delivering aid, but also about sending a message of solidarity with Gaza's people and challenging what they see as an unjust blockade that has lasted for over 17 years. Their message is that Gaza should not remain an open-air prison, cut off from the world. After the interception, reactions poured in from across the globe. Some European countries have called for a full investigation into the incident, while others have expressed concern about escalating maritime tensions. International NGO and pro-Palestinian groups have condemned Israel's actions, calling them an affront to humanitarian principles. Meanwhile, Israel's allies, particularly the United States, have largely supported its right to enforce the blockade, emphasizing the importance of preventing weapons from reaching militant organizations in Gaza. What makes this incident particularly significant is the timing. It comes amid rising regional instability and increased clashes along Israel's northern and southern borders. The situation in Gaza remains tense, with frequent flare-ups between Israeli forces and armed factions. The interception of the Sumud Flotilla is not just a maritime event. It's part of a larger geopolitical struggle over control, legitimacy, and public perception. For Israel, allowing unauthorized ships to breach the blockade could set a dangerous precedent. For activists, challenging the blockade is a way to keep international attention focused on Gaza's suffering and the political stalemate that fuels it. At the port of Ashdod, the seized vessels are now undergoing detailed inspection. Israeli authorities have stated that the passengers are being treated in accordance with legal procedures and will likely be deported after questioning. Human rights lawyers, however, are already preparing to challenge these detentions, arguing that the flotilla was operating within international law and that Israel had no jurisdiction to seize ships in international waters. Legal experts expect this case to spark renewed discussions at the United Nations and possibly lead to new resolutions or diplomatic statements. For those following the broader history, this is not the first time a Gaza-bound aid flotilla has been intercepted. The most infamous example occurred in 2010 when Israeli commandos raided the Turkish-led Mavi Marmara flotilla, resulting in the deaths of 9 activists. That incident triggered a massive international backlash and a temporary breakdown in Israeli-Turkish relations. While the current situation has not reached that level of violence, it is a stark reminder of how sensitive and combustible the issue remains. Observers note that both sides are playing a familiar narrative. Israel emphasizes security and the rule of law, presenting itself as a responsible state protecting its citizens from potential threats. The flotilla organizers and their supporters emphasize human rights and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, portraying Israel's actions as part of a broader system of oppression. Between these two narratives lies a complex web of politics, law, and emotion that has defined the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for decades. International reaction has also been shaped by shifting political alliances. Some Arab countries that recently normalized relations with Israel under the Abraham Accords have been more cautious in their criticism, balancing their diplomatic ties with domestic public opinion that remains strongly sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. In contrast, Iran and Turkey have used the incident to attack Israel rhetorically, accusing it of state piracy and aggression against civilians. In the media, coverage has been polarized. Western outlets have largely framed the incident through the lens of maritime security and diplomatic tension, while Arab and alternative media have highlighted the humanitarian angle, focusing on the blockade's impact and the courage of the activists. Social media has amplified both narratives, with hashtags supporting either the flotilla or Israel trending across platforms. At the core of this story is a question that continues to haunt the region. Can security and humanitarian principles coexist in a conflict zone as entrenched as Gaza? Israel insists that it cannot compromise its security, especially with groups like Hamas continuing to build rockets and tunnels aimed at Israeli towns. Activists counter that true security can only come from addressing the humanitarian disaster and political deadlock that fuel hostility and despair. As the ships sit docked at Ashdod, they have become symbols of a larger struggle between control and resistance, between law and conscience, between a state's right to defend itself and a people's right to survive. The images of those vessels, painted with peace slogans and carrying food and medicine, now behind military fences, encapsulate the contradiction that defines the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In the coming days, Israel is expected to release detailed findings from its inspections, possibly accompanied by video evidence to justify its interception. Activists are planning press conferences and legal actions to counter Israel's narrative and demand the release of their confiscated cargo. The UN and several international human rights bodies are also expected to issue statements or call for investigations. For the people of Gaza, however, this episode is one more chapter in a long history of blockade and broken promises. Whether or not the seized goods eventually reach them, the larger issues remain unresolved. The blockade continues, reconstruction efforts lag behind, and ordinary civilians bear the brunt of political and military decisions made far beyond their control. The interception of the Sumud Flotilla may fade from the headlines in a few days, but its echoes will linger. It highlights the enduring divide between Israel's security narrative and the international community's growing concern over Gaza's humanitarian plight. It also reminds the world that despite years of negotiations, ceasefires, and international summits, the core issues remain as intractable as ever. Every new interception, every diplomatic protest, every act of defiance at sea reinforces how deeply entrenched this conflict has become. The question now is whether the international community will continue to react passively, or whether this latest event will spur genuine efforts to re-examine the blockade and the policies that sustain it. As Israel's Navy patrols the waters off Gaza and the seized ships rest in Ashdod's port, one thing is clear. The sea, like the land, has become another battleground in a conflict that refuses to fade. The Sumud Flotilla may have been diverted, but its message of steadfastness, solidarity, and resistance continues to sail through the hearts and minds of people watching around the world. And that's where things stand for now. The coming days will reveal how both sides choose to move forward, through confrontation,